The Middle East just got more crowded and more dangerous. While the world was watching Ukraine and worrying about Europe, a new player has officially entered the war that nobody wanted to expand. On March 28, 2026, Houthi rebels in Yemen fired a ballistic missile that struck Israeli territory for the first time in this conflict, crossing a red line that had been respected even by Iran's most reckless proxies. The missile was intercepted, but the message was received. The war that began with Israel and Iran has now drawn in forces from the Arabian Peninsula, creating a front that stretches from the Mediterranean to the Indian Ocean, from the Suez Canal to the Strait of Hormuz. And while this was happening, while the region was reshaping itself in fire and blood, another war was being prepared in East Asia. South Korea, led by a president who has decided that American protection is no longer reliable, is building its own nuclear capability and breaking the alliance that has kept peace in Korea for 70 years. Two crises separated by thousands of miles, connected by a single thread: the collapse of American security guarantees and the rise of powers who no longer believe that Washington's word means anything. Welcome to the Global Eye. Today, we trace the connections between the Houthi missile that just hit Israel and the Korean nuclear shadow that grows darker by the day. We expose how one superpower's retreat is creating multiple power vacuums and how the leaders who are filling those vacuums are calculating that the old rules no longer apply. The missile launch was announced with the theatricality that has become characteristic of Houthi propaganda. A video released on social media showed the preparation, the launch, and the claimed impact, accompanied by chants and slogans that framed the attack as revenge for Israeli actions in Gaza and Lebanon. The reality was more complex and more dangerous than the propaganda suggested. The missile was a Birkin 3, an Iranian-designed weapon with a range of 200 kilometers, capable of reaching any target in Israel from launch sites in northern Yemen. It was intercepted by Israeli air defenses, but the interception required the expenditure of a $3 million Arrow missile, demonstrating the economic asymmetry that favors attackers over defenders in missile warfare. The significance of this attack is not in its military effect, which was negligible, but in its political implications. The Houthis have been attacking shipping in the Red Sea for months, disrupting global commerce and forcing the United States to deploy significant naval resources to protect commercial traffic. They have launched drones and missiles at Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, the regional powers that have been fighting them in Yemen since 2015. But they have not, until now, directly attacked Israel. That restraint was understood to be part of an Iranian strategy to keep the Yemen conflict separate from the broader confrontation with Israel, to avoid giving Israel justification for direct strikes against Houthi territory, and to preserve the Houthis as a threat in reserve rather than an active combatant. The decision to abandon that restraint reflects several developments that have reshaped the regional calculus. First, the direct Iran-Israel war that erupted in early March 2026 has removed the incentive for Iranian proxies to maintain plausible deniability. When Iran is launching ballistic missiles at Israeli nuclear facilities, when Israeli jets are striking Iranian command centers, the fiction that the Houthis are independent actors becomes unnecessary. Second, the American response to Houthi Red Sea attacks has been insufficient to deter escalation. Despite repeated strikes against Houthi launch sites and command centers, the attacks on shipping have continued, demonstrating that the United States is either unwilling or unable to impose costs that would change Houthi behavior. Third, the Houthis themselves have been emboldened by their survival against American and Saudi attacks, convinced that they have weathered the worst that their enemies can deliver and that they can now expand their operations without catastrophic consequences. The Israeli response to the missile attack was immediate and predictable. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who has been fighting for his political and physical survival since the Iranian attacks began, ordered retaliatory strikes against Houthi targets in Yemen. Israeli fighter jets, refueled in flight to reach their targets, struck missile storage facilities, radar installations, and command centers in Sana'a and other Houthi-controlled cities. The strikes were more extensive than previous Israeli operations against the Houthis, suggesting that Netanyahu intends to establish a new pattern of response that will deter future attacks through the threat of sustained punishment rather than limited retaliation. The apparent connection between a missile launch in Yemen and a political crisis in Korea is not immediately obvious, but it is profound. Both events are manifestations of the same underlying phenomenon: the erosion of American security guarantees and the adaptation of regional powers to a world where those guarantees can no longer be assumed. The Houthis attacked Israel because they calculated that American power, which has historically constrained their Iranian sponsors, is now sufficiently distracted and depleted that they can act with impunity. President Lee Jae-myung seized operational control from the United States and hinted at nuclear acquisition because he calculated that American reliability, which has been the foundation of Korean security for 70 years, has become sufficiently uncertain that self-reliance is now the safer option. These calculations are not independent. They are connected by observation and inference, by the global transparency that means every leader can watch American policy confusion in real time and draw their own conclusions about what it means for their own security. When the Houthis see American weapons diverted from Ukraine to the Middle East, they see an overstretched superpower that cannot meet all its commitments. When Lee sees the same diversion, he sees an ally that might abandon Korea if another crisis demands attention. When the Houthis see American diplomatic efforts focused on ceasefires rather than victory, they see weakness that can be exploited. When Lee sees the same focus, he sees an unreliable partner that might negotiate Korean security away for temporary stability elsewhere. The global nature of American security commitments means that failure in one theater affects perceptions in all theaters. This was the foundation of American strategy during the Cold War, when commitments to Europe and Asia were understood to be mutually reinforcing, so that credibility in one region supported credibility in all regions. The reverse is also true. When American credibility is damaged in Ukraine, it is damaged in the Middle East. When it is damaged in the Middle East, it is damaged in East Asia. The Houthis and President Lee are responding to the same signal, the same evidence that American power is no longer matched by American will, and that the security architecture that has maintained global stability for 3 generations is being dismantled by American choice. The consequences of this dismantling are not yet fully visible, but they are becoming clear enough to trace. In the Middle East, the entry of the Houthis into direct conflict with Israel creates a multi-front war that stretches Israeli resources and complicates any path to de-escalation. Israel is now fighting in Gaza, in Lebanon, against Iranian forces in Syria, and against Houthi forces in Yemen. Each front requires military resources, intelligence attention, and political management. The addition of the Houthis does not change the fundamental balance of power, but it adds friction, complexity, and opportunities for miscalculation that could escalate in unexpected directions. In East Asia, the Korean crisis is creating its own ripple effects. Japan, watching South Korea arm for independence, is accelerating its own military preparations. China, observing American confusion, is calculating whether the moment has come to move against Taiwan. North Korea, feeling threatened by southern nuclear hints, is fortifying its border and preparing for conflict that it might otherwise have avoided. The regional arms race that American alliances were designed to prevent is now underway, driven by the same perception of American unreliability that has emboldened the Houthis. The United States is attempting to manage 3 major crises simultaneously, and the attempt is revealing the limits of American capacity. In Europe, the Ukraine war continues with no end in sight, requiring sustained military support and diplomatic attention that the Trump administration is increasingly unwilling to provide. In the Middle East, the Israel-Iran war has expanded to include Houthi forces, creating demands for air defense, naval presence, and potentially ground forces that exceed what the United States can sustainably deploy. In East Asia, the Korean alliance is fracturing, requiring either renewed commitment to prevent nuclear proliferation or acceptance of Korean independence with all its regional consequences. The Trump administration has responded to this overstretch, not by prioritizing or by building coalition support, but by denial and improvisation. The president makes statements about winning wars that are contradicted by his Secretary of State's pursuit of ceasefires. Weapons are diverted from one theater to another without strategic logic, creating shortages everywhere rather than concentration anywhere. Allies are alternately courted and abandoned, consulted and ignored, producing confusion that paralyzes collective action rather than enabling it. The result is not the strategic flexibility that administration defenders claim, but strategic incoherence that multiplies threats faster than they can be addressed. The military implications of this overstretch are concrete and immediate. The United States has deployed 2 aircraft carrier groups to the Middle East to support Israel and deter Iran, reducing naval presence in the Pacific that might otherwise constrain Chinese action. Air defense batteries that were promised to Ukraine have been diverted to protect Israeli cities and American bases, leaving Ukrainian facilities vulnerable to Russian attack. Munition stockpiles that were built for potential conflict with China are being depleted in Middle Eastern operations, reducing the credibility of American deterrence in East Asia. Every commitment that is made to one ally reduces the capacity to support others, and the administration has made commitments faster than it has built the capacity to fulfill them. The diplomatic implications are equally severe. European allies watching American attention shift to the Middle East are concluding that they must build independent security capabilities regardless of American preferences. Asian allies watching American weapons diverted to other theaters are concluding that they must build independent nuclear capabilities regardless of American opposition. Middle Eastern allies watching American responses to Houthi attacks are concluding that American protection is insufficient and that they must make their own arrangements with Iran and its proxies. The alliance system that has amplified American power for 3 generations is being dismantled by American actions, and the pieces are being picked up by powers who do not share American interests or values. The Houthi attack on Israel cannot be understood without understanding the Iranian strategy that enabled it. Iran has built a network of proxies across the Middle East that allows it to project power without accepting the risks of direct confrontation. Hezbollah in Lebanon, militias in Syria and Iraq, and the Houthis in Yemen are all components of this network, trained, armed, and directed by Iranian Revolutionary Guard officers who operate from embedded positions within these forces. The network has been built over 2 decades and at enormous cost, but it has given Iran the ability to threaten multiple enemies simultaneously while maintaining plausible deniability that protects Iranian territory from retaliation. The decision to activate the Houthi component of this network reflects Iranian confidence that the current moment offers opportunities that justify the risks. The direct Iran-Israel war has already broken the taboo against state-on-state conflict in the region. So the addition of proxy forces does not represent a qualitative escalation. American responses to Iranian attacks have been insufficient to deter further Iranian action, suggesting that the United States is either unwilling to engage in the sustained military campaign that would be required to degrade Iranian capabilities or unable to do so while managing other commitments. And the Israeli military, despite its technological superiority, is showing signs of strain from multi-front operations that Iranian planners believe will eventually create vulnerabilities that can be exploited. The Houthi missile that struck Israel was not merely a Houthi decision. It was an Iranian decision made in Tehran by leaders who calculated that the expansion of the war to Yemen would serve Iranian interests by stretching Israeli resources, complicating American responses, and demonstrating to regional audiences that Iran's reach extends beyond its immediate borders. The Houthis provided the launcher and the crew, but the target selection, the timing, and the strategic purpose were determined by Iranian officers who have been embedded with Houthi forces since the Yemen war began. This Iranian control has implications for how the conflict can be managed or resolved. The Houthis cannot be negotiated with independently because they do not make independent decisions. Any ceasefire or settlement that involves Houthi forces must be acceptable to Tehran, which means it must serve Iranian interests in the broader regional confrontation. This makes diplomatic solutions more difficult because it means that what appears to be a local conflict in Yemen is actually a component of a regional struggle that cannot be addressed in isolation. And it makes military solutions more difficult because degrading Houthi capabilities does not degrade Iranian capabilities, which can be replenished and redirected as long as the Iranian regime survives and maintains its commitment to regional expansion. While the Middle East was absorbing the implications of Houthi entry into the war, East Asia was moving toward its own crisis with accelerating speed. President Lee Jae-myung's seizure of operational control from the United States, announced on March 26th, was followed by additional statements that clarified the scope of Korean ambitions and the timeline for their achievement. On March 28th, Lee addressed the Korean National Assembly and announced that South Korea would review all options for ensuring national security in an uncertain environment, language that every nuclear expert recognized as the final warning before actual weapon development begins. The Korean nuclear program that Lee is contemplating would not be a primitive device or a symbolic capability. South Korea has the technical capacity to produce sophisticated thermonuclear weapons, miniaturized for delivery by ballistic missiles, submarine-launched cruise missiles, and fighter aircraft. It has the fissile material, produced by its 24 nuclear power reactors, to build a stockpile of 100 or more weapons within 5 years of decision. It has the delivery systems, including the Hyunmoo ballistic missiles and the developing submarine force, to threaten any target in North Korea, China, or Japan. And it has the industrial base to maintain and expand this capability without external assistance. The regional implications of Korean nuclear acquisition are catastrophic. Japan, which has maintained its non-nuclear posture despite technological capacity that exceeds Korea's, would face irresistible pressure to follow suit. The Japanese nuclear taboo, already strained by Chinese expansion and North Korean threats, would collapse entirely if Korea went nuclear, while Japan remained non-nuclear. Taiwan, facing Chinese invasion threats that Korean nuclear weapons would not address, would demand American security guarantees that Washington might be unwilling to provide or would pursue its own nuclear option in secret. China, facing encirclement by nuclear-armed democracies, would accelerate its own military buildup and might decide that the window for resolving the Taiwan question by force was closing, creating incentives for preemptive action. The American response to this prospective proliferation has been confused and ineffective. The Trump administration has issued warnings about the consequences of Korean nuclear acquisition, but these warnings lack credibility because they come from a president who has already demonstrated that American security guarantees are conditional and negotiable. The administration has offered enhanced conventional support to Korea, but these offers are undermined by the simultaneous diversion of weapons to the Middle East that demonstrates where American priorities actually lie. And the administration has attempted to engage China as a partner in preventing Korean nuclearization, ignoring the reality that China sees Korean independence as preferable to strengthened American alliance and would not intervene to preserve a security architecture that Beijing believes serves American rather than Chinese interests. The simultaneous crises in the Middle East and East Asia are not separate events. They are symptoms of a global order that is fragmenting under the pressure of American retreat and the rise of regional powers who are filling the vacuums that retreat creates. The Houthi missile that hit Israel and the Korean nuclear program that Lee is preparing are connected by the common perception that American power, which has enforced global stability for 3 generations, is no longer available or reliable, and that regional powers must therefore provide for their own security by whatever means necessary. This fragmentation is accelerating because it is self-reinforcing. When Korea arms for independence, Japan follows, and China responds, creating an arms race that makes all parties less secure and more likely to resort to military solutions. When the Houthis attack Israel, Israel retaliates against Yemen, and Iran activates additional proxies, creating a cycle of escalation that makes diplomatic solutions less likely and regional war more probable. When the United States demonstrates confusion and overreach, allies lose confidence and adversaries gain boldness, creating more crises than American capacity can manage. The economic implications of this fragmentation are already visible and will become more severe. The Red Sea, through which 12% of global trade passes, is increasingly dangerous for commercial shipping, forcing costly rerouting around Africa. The Korean Peninsula, which produces essential components for global electronics and automotive supply chains, is preparing for conflict that would disrupt production and create shortages worldwide. The Middle East, which provides the energy that powers the global economy, is moving toward war that could destroy production facilities and block transit routes, creating price spikes that would trigger recession. The political implications are equally severe. The international institutions that were built to manage global problems, from the United Nations to the World Trade Organization to the International Atomic Energy Agency, are being bypassed or ignored as major powers pursue unilateral solutions to security challenges. The norms that constrained state behavior, from non-proliferation to non-aggression to protection of civilians, are being eroded by powers who calculate that violation will not be punished. And the American leadership that enforced these institutions and norms imperfectly but effectively for 3 generations has been withdrawn by choice, creating a vacuum that no other power is capable or willing to fill. The trajectory of events in March 2026 points toward confrontations that will be more dangerous than what has come before. In the Middle East, the Houthi entry into the war creates pressure for escalation that neither Israel nor Iran can fully control. Israeli retaliation against Yemen will kill civilians and create sympathy for the Houthi cause throughout the Arab world, pressure that Iranian propagandists will exploit. Iranian activation of additional proxies in Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon will stretch Israeli resources and create opportunities for attacks that might penetrate Israeli defenses. And the possibility of direct American-Iranian military engagement, which has been avoided despite numerous opportunities, becomes more likely as American forces are drawn into protection of shipping and bases that Iranian proxies are targeting. In East Asia, the Korean crisis is approaching a decision point that will determine the regional order for a generation. President Lee has not yet ordered nuclear weapon development, but he has prepared the political, technical, and military groundwork that would make such development rapid and irreversible. The trigger could be a North Korean test, a Chinese move against Taiwan, an American demonstration of further unreliability, or simply the accumulation of pressure that makes nuclear acquisition appear to be the least bad option. When that decision is made, the regional arms race will accelerate beyond any possibility of reversal, and the American alliance system that has prevented major war in East Asia for 70 years will be formally dissolved. The connection between these regional crises is American capacity and American will. The United States cannot manage simultaneous wars in Europe, the Middle East, and East Asia with the forces and resources currently available. Choices must be made about where to prioritize, and those choices will determine which allies survive and which adversaries advance. The Trump administration has demonstrated neither the strategic clarity to make these choices effectively, nor the diplomatic skill to build coalition support that would amplify American capacity. The result is drift, with each regional crisis developing according to local logic rather than global strategy, and with the cumulative effect of multiple crises overwhelming the capacity of any single power to manage them. This is not a drill. This is not a theoretical discussion about international relations that can be postponed until more convenient circumstances. The Houthi missile that hit Israel on March 28, 2026, was a signal that the Middle East war has expanded beyond any hope of contained resolution. The Korean nuclear program that President Lee is preparing is a signal that the East Asian order is being transformed in ways that will affect global security for a generation. And the American confusion that enables both developments is a signal that the global order that has maintained relative peace since 1945 is being dismantled by the very power that created it. You need to understand these connections. You need to see that the crisis in Yemen and the crisis in Korea are not separate stories, but chapters in the same story of American retreat and global fragmentation. You need to demand that your governments, whatever country you live in, recognize the stakes and act accordingly. The era of American security guarantees is ending, and the era that replaces it will be more dangerous, more competitive, and more violent unless new forms of international cooperation can be built quickly and effectively. Subscribe to the Global Eye, enable notifications, share this video with anyone who thinks that what happens in distant places doesn't affect their own security. The Houthi missile and the Korean nuclear shadow are connected by more than American confusion. They are connected by the reality that in an interconnected world, chaos anywhere becomes chaos everywhere. We are watching that chaos develop. We are documenting its sources, and we will not be silent about its consequences. 3 questions for those who watched until the end. Answer in the comments. I will read and respond to the most thoughtful analysis. Question A. Should America prioritize the Middle East war or the Korean nuclear crisis, and what are the consequences of the choice for global security? Question B, is the Houthi entry into the war a manageable expansion or the beginning of regional conflict that cannot be contained? Explain your reasoning. Question C, if Korea goes nuclear, should America accept it as fait accompli or use military force to prevent weaponization? What are the risks of each approach? Drop your answers below. This is the Global Eye. We see what others miss.